unedited. We're a humble little crowd tonight, but that doesn't mean we can't make some noise. So give some noise for Magers Quinn for having us tonight. And we'll make some noise for occasional Minnesotan Julian Randall. For blessing us. Is this the last stop on the book tour?
This is the last stop in May.
Wow. Oh, the last stop in May. We love that kind of news. Yes, we love 1099s. Yes. Thank you for coming and joining us. So I think tonight we're going to do a reading and then a little talking and then some more reading and then a little more talking. And then if y'all have any questions, we'll do that at the very end. Sound good? All right. Julia, what you got for us?
Cool. All right. So because I was stuck in the lift, I'm going to read a sequence about being stuck in the lift. This is from an essay called Grief featuring Kanye West. It's not what you think. The August air bristled with wasps the night Kanye West came to Soldier Field to make one last burning ship for his mother. The moonlight spilled over the trees and the heat clung to the last of the summer while I was stuck in traffic just like the rest of the city. I knew by then who Kanye was, but I was already in the process of writing a series of poems all titled The Book of Jesus to try and make sense of my instinct to gild elegy, to give every death mask a set of grills. So that show was, at some level, for work, at least according to my tax returns. But if I'm being honest, it was also because I had seen Kanye live twice. Once for the Yeezus tour in Brooklyn and a second time for Made in America in Philly. But the Kanye show I'd always regretted missing came in 2007 during his Glow in the Dark tour. The concert was the same day my father and I packed up some clothes and hustled our car up to Minneapolis to see if I could clinch a last second spot at the high school I eventually graduated from. I'd never seen Kanye in Chicago, and it didn't feel like a thing to die without seeing. It was the novel I had never read, and I wouldn't know if it could be perfect unless I came to see what he'd made of the grief that naming the album Donda promised. Now, the rollout for Donda was some weird shit, even by Kanye standards, and we are now in the years where that is perhaps the point. After a horrific episode running for president, saying all types of utter nonsense about slave nets, Kanye had been mercifully silent for a stretch before rumblings began that Kanye was working on an album named after his mother. And I didn't believe it for real until Kanye moved into the Mercedes-Benz Dome in Atlanta, putting on shows where clips circulated of this nigga, my once idol, running around in circles in a cape while poorly captured audio garbled around him. I had a feeling that whatever was going to happen when I saw Kanye at Soldier Field was going to shift my understanding of his work the way seeing the stagecraft of the Yeezus tour made me finally like those murky, tortured amps. And I wanted to understand. Even after all this time, I just wanted to understand. So I paid way too much money for a ticket to see Kanye grieve harmoniously. But I wasn't going anywhere as the lift I was stuck in inched piecemeal through bumper-to-bumper traffic that ran up Lakeshore Drive, a sprawling pastoral of red lights, each with an equally pissed-off driver inside that car. Even still, it was all good in the gentrified hood because all of Twitter said that despite me being over an hour late, so was Kanye. A typical boy who thinks himself a god, working diligently to invent his own destruction and then vanishing. I want to spare you my pulse. I want to spare you the description of the traffic congealed so badly that CPD demanded my driver let me out damn near 2 blocks from the stadium. The thud swelling in my ears as a stadium of cries dotted the air, and I knew Kanye must have just come out because the screams hang in the air like birds. I want to spare you my pulse and the ache once more of my knees as I am once again running towards a grief I did not author, and the sear of my body as I hustle up 3 flights of stairs because even the nosebleed section of this show costs fucking bank, my torn hip burning until it is a kind of singing. One day it will be the melody of one bone against another, and that sound will be one day maybe grow louder than whatever voice I have left, and I just know by the last flight of steps that one day my pain will be the loudest thing about me, and what exactly does it cost for the mind to release what the body is forced to mourn? All of this matters, and none of it matters, because finally I'm at the top of the steps, the closing notes of jail dissolving in the air when I see that Kanye West has rebuilt his childhood home in the middle of Soldier Field. Some grief defies metaphor. Some grief starves without it. I was prepared for a nigga in a cape. I was prepared to witness something like the final shot of Genius where Kanye is lifted into the ceiling of the Mercedes-Benz Dome, light in all directions, holding the smoke captive, the boy rising into his grief while the ash beneath splayed wide as the arms of a magnolia. I was not prepared for the house. And from the distance, I could see the shapes of men come and go from Kanye's mother's porch, and I couldn't see that Kanye had enlisted another wealthy abuser in Marilyn Manson to sit with a spell with him and DaBaby. And while I sat between swaggering North Side boys and old Yeezus tees, Confederate flags cracked like mud across their chests, I stared and took notes, and in the rasp of Soldier Field's shitty speakers wheezing out elegy after bass-heavy elegy, it was all something like good until Kanye West caught on fire. Woo! I've been wanting to do that one for a while.
All right, so The Dead Don't Need Reminding. Out last month, right? From Bold Type Books. Anybody got a copy yet? Anybody coming in as a report reader? We better have a copy after tonight. Okay, cool. We'll explore this. Torrin, you want to start us off with a question?
Yeah, so, I mean, I kind of warned you this is something I was going to ask about, but I'm glad you read from this essay, which I think talks really poignantly about grief, and in particular, what it is to encounter another person's grief on stage, as well as the role of elsewhere in this essay, your work and grief on stage. I guess I'm hoping you could talk a little bit about the role of repetition, of anaphora and return in this collection's encountering with grief.
Starting off with the heat. Okay. Just so geek to be up here with y'all. Yeah, so I think that for me, like my training, my background is as a poet, and specifically as a poet who like came up in the slam scene, came up in a very specific time of the slam scene where like there was just an incentive to try and like write the hard poem, but not necessarily to do the hard healing the poem would invoke. So I wanted to do something with that, and over time I realized that like one of my biggest influences that you have to talk about during that time period is Kanye West, right? And so that kind of became a guideline for how that whole essay like comes together. But before that, I had to learn how the formalist in me kind of was gonna live in this book. I like definitely wrote like a lot of form poems for like previous time that I was ever writing to adults. I was writing for kids for most of the last like couple of years, but as I was working on this, I wanted to make essays at first that were just like really long, really dense poems. And then once even I was tired of reading them shits, I had to find another way to make it like texturally different. Like it's just like you can't just spend the whole album trying to kill niggas that you had just killed in the previous sentence. People get very bored of that very quickly. So I had to start thinking about like, okay, well how do we move through essays? What is the important thing about essays for me? And so I figured out that my relationship with genre is kind of my relationship with time, right? That like poems are about like stopping time, moving through time, like the noted Oscar snub of Clock Stoppers from 2003. But like fiction is about having a question that requires an entirely separate timeline altogether, one in which the magic that we see is more palpable, or there are people who can live beneath the sea, et cetera, et cetera. So if I know those two things, then like nonfiction can't just be like, okay, it's like poems but longer. Like what is the actual like emphasis point there? And so for me, that came down to like this idea of like, okay, well if we use repetition as a way of kind of holding a central image across the course of it, it'll be much harder for me to lose track of what I was talking about, and then suddenly this essay that was about a very specific thing is about everything. So I felt like I had to like put that bass line in there to stop the guitar solo going on too long.
You're talking about form too, because could you talk through like, I guess decisions not only to, because if you ever read the book, right, so like you first read the first essay, right, which is maybe one of the more traditional like essays in the book, but immediately you're encountering these repetitions in the lines, or like these returns that if you're a poet almost feel kind of akin to like a sonnet crown. Or maybe even a pantoum or something like that, but you see this language coming back up, and you're like, okay. But then you keep looking through the book, and after I saw that, I was like, what are you doing? And so I flipped through writing, you start seeing stuff that looks like screenwriting. You start seeing very long lists, right? You see like a sonnet in like 16, or an essay in 16 bars, right? So there's all these shapes and holders that you're playing with as well. I wonder if you can talk about, I guess, because that feels like the nerdiness, right? So just the writing of it. So I want to know, like, I guess, like, what was the nerd of your brain doing, trying those forms? Was it just trial and error? What were the logics behind some of that? And I'm also wondering how you think of where this book sits in genre, and if you had to maybe name it a new genre, what would it be? Because, you know, it seems like maybe writing the straightforward collection of dense poetic essays didn't work, right? I'm glad it didn't. And, you know, there is this, like, thing of the essay, right, which means to try, or maybe it means to, like, say or think, right, and what it does. I think poetry is definitely a thing of witnessing. And then there's this, like, reluctancy to, like, call it a memoir, as well that's present in the book, right? But it is kind of a memoir. I was struggling with this when I was reading. I was like, is it a memoir? It kind of is, but it's like a memoir through essays, but there's, like, this thing about looking outward as well, or looking into media, and so I think you really messed up the librarian's game. I don't know if they know where to put it. So for you, I guess, where does it sit in genre for yourself, or what do you see yourself pulling from maybe these different genres that it's rubbing against?
Yeah, word. Okay, I'm gonna do the nerdiness part first because I'm trying to figure out like a cool name.
Right.
Yeah, I think like for me, I always to me one of the great measures of like whether or not like can you be my favorite rapper is like can you live on somebody else's beat, not just the beats that are like curated specifically for like what you do best. And I think that was the first kind of like interior like creative challenge, right? It was just like, okay, well, can I make this essay feel like an essay, like an episode of BoJack Horseman? How would I do that for somebody who's never necessarily seen it, right? And then you have this question of like, this is a whole collection of kind of like moments of witness that I have to put somebody inside of, and they may never have seen any of it. I'm gonna stick with the BoJack Horseman essay example as a thing, just because like you can see BoJack for like $19.99 plus tax. Like that's not like necessarily the issue. The issue of that essay is that like nobody here is ever gonna get the opportunity to meet my grandmother. And once I was able to accept that, like, oh, this essay is about her, it's not just about like the concept of like going to therapy or the concept of depression. This is about a very specific grief that is like at the core of this collection, but also ironically was the core of this collection long before she died, right? I can build a bridge between you seeing Beatrice Horseman and seeing in her the moments that I saw from my grandmother, right? So I felt like that was kind of like the way that I needed to have form kind of meet like content and reference. And also one of my favorite rappers is like very early Lupe Fiasco. So I'm like a very heavily referential thinker, very heavily referential talker. So I had to find ways that the structure of it still felt like you were seeing or hearing this thing, even if you've never seen or heard it before. There is a playlist in the back of the book, though, so you know you can look all those things out as well. But yeah, so I think that like that's kind of where like the nerd element of it came through. Is I was like, I wanted this very specific reference, but I'm gonna make it feel like it's the most natural shit in the world.
Yeah. It's a way of inviting people into your astonishment and into your epiphany, right?
Exactly.
Where maybe the poet just like sort of operates from the moment of astonishment. The essayist, I think you're saying, like kind of, you know, in you has to take a step back to also not just invite us to see it with you, but invite us to see it through you and along you. Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess like I would.
And that's also very nerdy, right?
Yeah.
Because you like there's a strategy to like convincing somebody that your favorite anime is great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I guess connected to those same ideas, I'm thinking now about the Spider-Verse essay, moving on for Spider-Man, and that mode of trying to capture a specific piece of media's textures, the way that you do in that essay. But the way that that essay begins again with these alternate takes is something that happens other places in the book for folks who haven't read it. And I guess in connection with this question, I'm wondering how you thought about the role of alternate histories or reimaginings of historical events, particularly in relation to your own family's history within the book?
Love that question. Quick show of hands. Who here have been to Mississippi? Word. Okay, cool. So y'all will know what I'm talking about. Here's an important thing that if you ain't got no roots in Mississippi, ain't got nobody who lived in Mississippi name up around you that you don't pick up if you are like me and you grew up in the North your whole life. Mississippi is a place of boundless possibility. Like there is, and within that possibility, there is so much like legitimate pain and history as well. But it is also a place that has been a cradle of Black liberation and Black liberated life for generations, right? And so as you're riding beneath just how much sky is out there, there's a learning process to like opening yourself to the fact that like there's tender possibility amidst the thorns, right? Amidst all that kudzu. Like you are also a kind of invasive species that is like trying to make its way through here just like anything else. So I think upon like figuring that out, like that was the first time that I figured that imagination is a way to build a bridge across diaspora, across history, right? About like what were their day-to-day lives now that they cannot tell me, now that the archive refuses to hold them, which brings us to our second problem, which is that I live 53 miles away from the town where my family was likely enslaved, and all of those records are gone. Because within a month of my great-grandfather leaving, the city clerk's office catches on fire, town hall goes 1 month later. So there's this mourning of like a certain kind of proof. But then it's, you think about Toni Morrison talking to Ralph Ellison. I'm just like, invisible to who, right? Proof for who? Do I need to, I've never in my whole life told the story of what happened to my great-grandfather, who was a man who passed for white for a living. He was manager of a national life insurance company. And one day, what was always gonna happen happened. A bunch of people from the town rolled up into his office, said, you got 24 hours, pack up all your stuff. We ever see you or anyone you love around here again, we will tar and feather you to death. I have never met a single Black person I've told that story to who said, but what about, it's never happened. It's never happened. All of us immediately snap into the believability of that. So if we absolutely already have that bridge, what else is possible, right? I've thought constantly about the fact that like, tar and feather is just, it's such a specific way to threaten to kill somebody. Like it takes real commitment to like try and ensure death on somebody like that. Like all death take commitment, but like it was such a specific image, and I kept having this like recurrent dream almost of my great-grandfather like unfurling wings that he already had. How does he save himself from what people already presumed he did not have in order as a means towards escape, right? And so I think that like thinking through these alternative histories, even if they're just like the very small belief that I've always had, though I have no proof to ensure it, that me and my grandmother had the same favorite flower. That like one day she had a tree that she sat under for shade, and one day that tree was gone, was lost to her forever. If you can understand that grief, it doesn't matter if the story is 100% true.
It feels like a homage to the, I mean, I've got City of Hartman's coming up, thinking about how, you know, sort of we fictionalize our ways into these histories of what we know is real, the many different afterlives of slavery. It's all, but also what's coming up to me is that you're meeting, right, because nerdy in this book particularly, right, we're usually talking about fantasy and fiction, right, but it is meeting this homage to fantasy that is happening with the geekiness, with the nerdiness, right, with the media that is often, you know, the spark for many of these essays. It's meeting that same imagination that you're bearing witness to the witnessing of your own history, right, that same imagination that is calling forth, right, which is part of like why we go to those medias, right, like you see something of yourself in the comic book, in the TV show, in the video game, right, there is those heroes, right, they often are championing, there's something in ourselves that we're championing when we're cheering them on, right? And so to look upon your own life, your own family history with that same sort of, the imagination of a Stanley, it feels beautiful. I'm gonna pivot Talk about being funny. Yeah, I guess. You know, because there is all you know, there are moments in the book that make you want to cry, they can bully it out of you. But it's also funny as shit. I don't remember Refuse being funny. No. I know you're funny, being your friend, but I don't, and like, you know, and you know, there's humor, you know, of course you got to make the kids ha-ha a little bit. So did you learn how to be funny right in middle grade? Was it working? Was there anybody you worked with that sort of unlocked your funny? I've really seen also Kiese's hand on the book a lot, in a way that you totally spun your own, but I'm wondering, like, I don't know, where did Funny Julian on the page come from, and what's it like working that bone? Muscle.
It took a lot.
Muscle, not a bone. Yeah.
That's bad. It took a lot of like trust work with myself, honestly. Because I think that, like, you know, like I invoked early on that like my training is as a poet, but specifically that my training is like initially and first as like a slam poet, like a poet who is like primarily lives for slams. And the thing about slam poems is that if the poems start funny, it don't never stay there. It's always a larger metaphor for some like deep pain, or until I stopped trusting my own humor, because I thought that people were just gonna kind of brush it aside and just be like, okay, but like what's the part that's like raw? Where's the blood at? So that carried through all the way to Refuse, that had like things that I considered to be jokes, but that the god Amy Elizabeth Matado cooked my ass in the middle of a thesis chair meeting. She was just like, you are constantly joking, and it is nowhere in your work. And I was just like, what? She's like, no. Point it out. Find the jokes right now. Couldn't find them fast enough. The point was already made. So I was like, damn, I don't know. I figured like because of the way that I like wrote poems, even like I was like never like able to like trust myself to focus in on the absurd in a way that like absolutely like you end up working that muscle so much more when you're working with kids, because they have to laugh, right? You have to be able to make them laugh, or they will be. They don't care. Which makes them like kind of the best audience ever in a lot of ways. But as this was going through, I was like re-listening to Heavy, and I was like, damn, this nigga kid say funny as hell. Like just little things that he slide in there, and I was like, oh, okay, like I can trust that people will be able to like read this and know that I'm like, you know. So I think that's where the humor came in for sure. Also, it helps me like not take things too seriously, because sometimes I'll hit like a lyrical line, and I'm like, ooh, I'm the best rapper alive. Let's keep this going.
Well, speaking of being the best rapper alive, why don't you read something else for us?
Cool.
A little more relaxed, so let's get on the text. Sell that book quieter. What you gonna read from?
You know, let's like, you know what? Actually, since we talking about comedy and shit, yeah, this is an essay from. Oh, actually, yeah. Let's work this. Yeah, this is from an essay about Jordan Peele, and the idea is that the difference between horror and comedy is the music. The last normal day of 2020 was bright as an omen on my street in Minneapolis. After grad school, which I was just on that street. It was so weird. It was so weird. Anyway, sorry. The last normal day of 2020 was bright as an omen on my street in Minneapolis. After grad school, I'd been taken on for a job in publishing, and I was on my way to the venue to celebrate a friend's book release when I saw the weird acronym of letters, COVID, was spreading like, well, a plague. At that point, all I knew about COVID was that Rudy Gobert had it, and that the man they made president seemed confident it would blow over in a couple of days. Which, of course, meant it was a lie. It meant our enemy was as wide as the sky. It meant there was no negotiating with what wishes you dead. It was March, and whole cities' worth of doors shut. It was March, and the whole block went silent. It was March and it would end in 2 weeks. It was March and niggas got in fist fights over months worth of toilet paper. It was March and the tragedy already felt like it had stretched for years. It was March and every mouth disappeared. It was March, nobody knew the rules. It was March and it has sort of stayed March forever, right? In April, nobody knew what to wear to the apocalypse. The grass grew wild where we couldn't stand, and if you saw someone on the street, you kind of awkwardly leapt 6 feet away from them. In April, COVID was the worst group project we ever failed, worst game of freeze tag ever. In April, I lost my job, and any superlatives that may have once been associated with me died on the vine. In May, everyone, and I really mean everyone, was really into Tiger King. In May, the country has an appetite for spectacle. In May, the rich are their own country. In May, hardly anyone's my president these days. In May, anti-vaxxers licked locked doors in protest. In May, everyone was catching up on The Sopranos and taking master classes for what they do in the new world. It was May, and the difference between horror and comedy, it was the music. It was May, and there had never been so much silence. It was May, and George Floyd was murdered by the police on a street corner in Minneapolis, and the trick was the new world was the old world all along. The thing about the alien invasion narrative is that it often counts on the idea that in the face of an existential threat to global society, we will all go full Independence Day and rally towards a big win over the invaders. But then the pandemic came along, and I cannot emphasize this enough. Niggas was coming to blows over toilet paper and whether germs were even a real thing. It was and still is the world in which my phone was flooded with snippets of a video of George Floyd's last breaths. I have never made myself watch the video, and I never will. I have seen enough videos of the last minutes of a man slowly being murdered by an officer who knew him and who would have been granted the authority to kill him even if he didn't, to know that there is no negotiating with what wants you dead.
Yeah, we just talk about comedy. You want to read that? I mean, I know Jordan Peele was in it, but like when you said comedy, we're laughing. I didn't laugh. I felt very deeply.
You know, it's one of those things where like this is the other problem with my humor is that I'll read something, I'm just like, I remember laughing, and then
It was fun. It did the thing though. It was funny at first. I was like, "Hi, Tiger King," and then it was like, "Oh yeah, the world." Good job.
And I'm thinking about the way in which this is a significant change in the kind of way humor functions in your work from the poetry days, where humor is always a setup for the punchline, which is anything but humor. But I think in this case, and we've talked a lot in the group chat about the way in which there's this blurry line between comedy and horror, which I was so geeked to get to that essay and see you working with that concept, but I think it really functions on this discomfort, right, of how closely the things sit, and the way in which what is comedy in one repetition becomes horror in another. I think you're kind of enacting that change of music that the essay is talking about. Yeah, I guess it's another example, right, of how you're leveraging the kind of formal conventions of what you've chosen to make the topic of the essay. I wish I had a question coming into my brain. I had a lot of thoughts that have not.
I like
quite
that thought
come.
though. It's a good thought. It's really interesting too, right? Because there is such a sonicness to your essay, right? And when I think about horror and comedy, right, they're both about eliciting a reaction to know you're doing it, right? And a sonic reaction at that, right? You want laughs or screams, right? And you do that. It's interesting that like a thing about sussing out the difference, right? The difference is the music. The difference is the kind of music you even make, right? When the genre plays you like an instrument. But then there's all this sonic, like Tora pointed out earlier, the anaphora work, right? There's this sonic force, this lyric velocity that I think is rare to find in essays sometimes. The best do it, right? And you're doing it. Thank you. So I ain't saying you the best, but it's a hell of a debut in the genre. I'll tell you that. It's a hell of a debut in the genre. So it's just interesting, right, that there's so much about the sound, which is, beautiful to think about an essay collection when you think about the sound of things. I don't know if we have any of those. Good job. I don't have a question either. I just have congratulations. Do we have any questions from the audience? Maybe is this a point to open it up? Gethsemane.
Hey, Brian. So I'm curious about what were all the essays you were reading taking in, right? We talk about music, we talk about anime, and you're in this fantasy Spider-Man, but like when it came to like, let me go read some essays. What were the essays?
Ooh, that's a good one. All right. I feel like a really important like foundational essay for me is like Three Black Boys in Mississippi from the original edition of How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America by Kiese Layman.
Yeah.
Like specifically, I think a lot about the Tupac and Bernie Mac sections of that essay, and I was so devastated when it didn't end up making the cut for the second one because I don't know. There's not enough essays about Bernie Mac. But I think often about that essay, the titular essay from that collection, 9 Considerations of Black People in Space, I think, by Hanif Abdurraqib is just like one of my all-time favorites. The book that he just put out, because I was like, yeah, no, that nigga's the best. that nigga's the best. His most recent book, I think, like would have been Dead Don't Need Reminding's favorite cousin if they known they was being born at the same time. What else did I end up reading a lot of? Jesmyn Ward's like Men We Reaped. I don't know if there's a specific section of it, but I think that it was more just structurally how do you create a collection of nonfiction that's like all working together towards like one point. And she's even like a good example of like what I mean when I say like nonfiction's about controlling the flow of time to me, because that book like famously kind of starts a little bit at the end. Like you're seeing her after like 3 very deep griefs and losses, and that's where the book starts, and we're working our way back towards the eventual like revelation of like how her brother died, right? And yeah, I think that those are definitely like some of like my like biggest initial influences. There's a Safia like lyric essay that I can't remember the name of. I think that it's something to the effect of boys like me better when they can't place where I'm from. I think about that one as like another great example of like how do you like balance like lyric and like just like ironic storytelling.
Thank you, Fred.
Any other questions out there?
What did you think about X-Men '97?
Spoilers, only halfway through.
I am so gassed because tomorrow I'm gonna get to see that season finale. If anybody spoils it for me, I will write the wrong name in your book. It's coming. But I've been really enjoying it.
What's next? I mean, you're always busy. Is there another book?
Yeah,
Works?
I have a middle grade novel dropping in September called The Chain Breakers. It's
Come on,
about
T-Book.
it was the first time last time. Never do this again. Never. Y'all been lovely. Don't get me twisted, but nah. Yeah, I have a middle grade novel coming out September 3rd. It's called The Chain Breakers. It's about a tween Grim Reaper who helps the souls of folks lost during the Middle Passage and the inheritance of her father's ship to try and save him. I'm very, very proud of it. Yeah, and then besides that, it's not like officially announced yet, but I am starting to get back into my verse bag through a verse novel called Shook. It's about an anxious basketball player.
Nice.
Did you
about
watch one of those?
I was
Did you play basketball or football?
both, and I got hurt doing both.
Oh wow, really got beat up there.
You should find out more about in the essay collection.
Come on, bud.
Okay, I got a couple more questions, I think. Also, for those interested, we are 6 minutes left in the first quarter. Wolves up 16-8.
Hell yeah.
So you're a Midwesterner, right? But the book very much is a Southern book. I think. Well, it's both, right? But you know, it's questing in Mississippi. I want to know how did the South rub off on your style? It's interesting, right? Because even the book essays you're reading, right, were often coming from Southern writers as well. So, what do you feel like has become Southern about Julian as a writer?
Or what did you learn from the Southern influence on you?
I think like there's like I told kids say this once that I feel like he writes a bit like Jerome Bettis used to run. Like, there's like a way that like the base of how he curates language, like it bounces off of other things and gains momentum. And I think that that's so much of that. Like you in Mississippi, like you hear cars before you see them, and it ain't never the engine that you heard first, right? So I think that a lot of like that kind of like bouncing like relationship with language in a way that like, you know, from the Midwest and also like artistically kind of raised on the East Coast during my like college years. So I think that I was always more like seeking high note than I was seeking bass. And I feel like the bass comes in once I was like willing to open myself up to being like more of a Southern storyteller. I think that it's that. I think that there is like a casualness with which I like tried to curate the voice in the book to be like more akin to my own voice, and I think that some of that comes from just like a comfortability that matured in the South, and so is like in some ways deeply Southern. I think that it's that, and also just the ways that like that first essay is set up the way that it is in like the like kind of like triptych format, because I felt like it was really important that we closed on talking about Hista Rich and Rondalyn K. Pierce, who is one of the most prominent Black historians in Mississippi, most prominent Black historian of Lafayette County, and telling these stories of like, you know, even with all the years that I was here, like this place became home to me, but isn't like necessarily my home. It's not necessarily the place that I'm from, and acknowledging that like there's like a long tradition of like authors like coming down to the South and writing an essay and writing essays and books and what have you about how folks down there don't know up from down, even though they taught you what up was in the first place. So I think that it came from that acknowledgement, and I think that rubbed off on me too.
In thinking about you as a writer across, you know, a wealth of genres, I think in my own mind you exist primarily as a writer I think about in terms of transfiguration and alchemy. And so I guess I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how across genres your relationship to metaphor and simile have changed. Because they do feel different.
Word. I love that question. Yeah, I think like with the kids, like it's so much less about me, and I think that it has to kind of start from that consideration, right? Like I am making the story, but the story is for them. So like if the metaphor was hot but they can't understand it, then like what have we really accomplished besides like continuing to like metaphorically and genuinely price kids out of middle grade and YA, because like now all of this is for the adults who they're trying to find a way to become in the first place. So I think that like because of that, I have like this wealth of metaphors and other stuff that I'm just like, oh, next time I have some adults to talk to, I'm gonna tell y'all all about them. The way that I'm just like, you know, when you think about it, a slave name is really just a two-headed snake that lives in your mouth, and like kids are not going to understand that, or rather, the amount of mental gymnastics they would have to do would pull them out of the story, right? So I think that it's like a way of learning like different priority scales about like what is actually helpful, what's important, and I think also just like gaining a confidence and whatnot with like the fact that like most people, like the majority of the poems of mine that they've ever read were like I love those poems. I'm proud of those poems. And they're also like written so close to the aftermath of me like not graduating with my class, so close to like this way in which like poetry became my way of proving that I was like, I'm not dumb. Like I'm not a failure. I'm not useless. Like I have this thing that I do, and when I go up there, people feel some type of way when I'm doing it, and I can make that happen. And that kind of ego ain't got no place in kids writing. The most important thing is what is the important thing that you have to say to young people, and trying to stay like keep fidelity to your own taste on that.
Which one do you get to be the most selfish in?
I feel like it's probably poems. I feel like it's probably poems writ large, because like nonfiction, you always get like just like a little nugget in your chest about like, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? Like, what if somebody comes through and is just like, we called some people from your life and
Nobody's fact-checking the poem.
nobody fact checks the poems. They're just like, absolutely, you grew wings from your feet. You good?
Not the Icarus. No, that's not Icarus. That Hermes. Them white people did. I don't know. They all dead. Or mythical, whatever.
Little column A, little column B.
Yeah, exactly. They was Greek somehow. All the damn wings. Any more questions from the audience? Julian, anything you want to leave us with?
We got one.
Oh, yes.
I was just gonna do a quick one. Do you have an advice for a poet who might be trying to write in a different genre?
Ooh.
Yeah. What would be my advice? You need your group chats more than ever. Like it sounds like it's like a flippant answer, but it's not. Like I think the reality is that like I wouldn't have been able to do any of the like genre transformations I had if it weren't for the community of people who I can call and be like, I don't think this shit working. I don't think it's working. I don't think it's working. And then to be able to sit there and be like, okay, but you also said that when you were blank. Like you need somebody to keep that archive and also keep that flame alive for you, right? Like fundamentally, if the aspiration is there, oftentimes the ability is there. It's all in like execution, and the execution can't be divorced from confidence. Confidence can't be divorced from tenderness. Tenderness can't be divorced from community. So you need your group chats more than ever.
Any technical things that helped you out?
Yeah. Just read as many poets who came from the genres and like kind of traditions that you did, who are now working in a different genre. I think that having seeing those tips and tricks and knowing that people learn those tendencies from a very similar place that you did can be helpful. Like learning how to be funny came to me partially from Kiyase, partially from Hanif, and a little bit from Amy on World of Wonders. I think just feeling like I had a new community or not even a new community, but a community that I was evolving alongside of, let me pull from their tricks in a way that like, not saying there's always something to be learned from James Baldwin, but I had to learn very, very early on that was not what the essays wanted from me and what they wanted me to accomplish. Baldwin did Baldwin so that I wouldn't have to do Baldwin, I could do me.
Kiyase Limon and Amy Nizuka Matado, 3 months to train in a cage fight. Who wins?
Might be the hardest question.
With or without roller skates?
Weapon of choice, each one. Each one with a weapon or peril of choice.
I have to say Amy because I feel like Kiyase fundamentally don't want to be a killer, and Amy's a Capricorn.
There's some untapped potential.
I feel like at the end of the day, if you give a Capricorn a task, we'll do it. We gonna complain the whole way.
Hate killing this. Could have been working on. All right, can we have a round of applause for books available